Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And yes, we are back with another wonderful interview for the channel here. This time, I'm not only speaking to one guest, but two. Yes, I had the privilege last week of sitting down with not only the writer, but also the director of the recent Lovecraftian monstrosity that is Suitable Flesh. Yes, we just reviewed that one on the channel, and we gave it very favorable reviews. I mean, this was definitely right up Luke and I's alley. We're huge Lovecraft fans. We also are huge Stuart Gordon fans. So to see this kind of come to fruition and actually get made, and to be at the level of quality that it is, was seriously just an absolute joy for us. It is out and available in theaters and on VOD for you to check out right now. So I encourage you to go forth and watch that. But I will also let you know that this interview, I want to say for the most part, we don't dive into any spoilers, or if we do, they're not very big. They're not going to ruin the film for you. But yes, it is seriously just one of those moments since doing this where I'm kind of sitting down and I'm getting real nervous because I mean, Dennis Paoli, the gentleman we're going to start off here with, he's worked on things like Reanimator and From Beyond, and basically anything that Stuart Gordon has touched, everything from that to Castle Freak. This man has literally shaped how I view Lovecraft on cinema. Like, it's just like he is the definitive writer when it comes to these properties. He's adapted this material, and yeah, he's also done some other really kick-ass things throughout his career. And to see him get to kind of push this project through with Barbara Crampton and Joe Lynch, it's just absolutely incredible. So why don't we kick things off with him? So we'll hop into that interview. You'll see me again once more before we hop into the other interview here. But yes, this is my short chat with Dennis Paoli. Alrighty, hey guys, I'm here with the great Dennis Paoli here, the mastermind behind films like Reanimator and From Beyond, and most recently Suitable Flesh. Thank you, sir, for joining me. We are thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And I live in the reflected genius. I have been very fortunate in my career to live within the reflected genius of Stuart Gordon and now Joe Lynch. So if there's any real credit out there for the world, yeah, I wrote it, and I'll take credit for that. But those guys really made it. They made it shine. They made it pop. They both make movies that want to reach out of the screen, grab you, and shake you. They want
Absolutely.
Our horror film is like our sensibility is like that 80s horror film sensibility where the idea isn't just to sort of creep you out, which you could do with Lovecraft. There's plenty of creep in Lovecraft. But what we really wanted to do was to get you hooting and stomping the floor. And
No.
we think we might have done that again.
I think you have too. My co-host and I just put up our review today, and I mean, we were just thrilled with this. It feels
Cool.
right in line with the other stories that you and Stuart had worked together on. And that kind of brings me to my first question for you here. So, like, in the info, like the write-up that was done in kind of the press notes, Barbara Crampton had made a statement saying that, just after the unfortunate passing of Stuart Gordon, that you guys were talking on the phone, and like she wanted to know what was a story that was something you really wanted to tell, something you didn't get a chance to. And I just want to know, what was it about this story, this Lovecraft tale, that really drew you in?
When Stuart was working on, Stuart was in Europe in the late 90s, and he was working on Castle Freak and then on Dagon. And we were sort of looking for the next project we could do. And we both like the story Thing on the Doorstep, the Lovecraft story, The Thing on the Doorstep. It has more narrative structure than it tells a longer version of its story than a lot of Lovecraft's work does. Plus, it was also tighter with its characters. It had three characters that interacted, so it was really good. It was a really good story to tell, and Lovecraft told it very well. If you know our work and you go back to something like From Beyond, we told the whole story. We told all of Lovecraft's story of From Beyond before the credits. So we had
Yep.
to imagine what happened after that. Luckily, Lovecraft does that to you. He sparks your imagination and he lets you go. And he invites you into his stories to imagine what you can imagine might be the most horrible thing that could happen, the most horrible creature that you could engage. So when we picked up Thing on the Doorstep, there's a little more story to that. Stuart was always a really powerful narrative storyteller. Stuart's strength as a filmmaker, besides his visual sense, was his storytelling ability. So while he was gone, I took the story and I wrote a version. When he came back, I gave it to him. He liked it. He put on his producer's hat. He tried to get it produced. It got optioned, but it didn't get made. He schlepped it around a little more. He made another couple movies, but he would always bring that film up when he talked to other producers and was trying to raise money. He got it optioned again in the early 2000s. It didn't get made. Some actors were interested in it in around 2005, 2006. They optioned it. They took it to some producers. It didn't get made. So it had been turned down. It had been tweaked, but turned down 3 times in a row. And the producers always gave the same reason for turning it down. And I'll let you guess what it was. But it was sitting there for another 10 years when I did get back in touch with Barbara after we unfortunately lost Stuart early in the pandemic. We reconnected at some Zoom memorials. She, besides being one of the great scream queens, she's now a really successful producer of low budget horror. She said, "Do you have any scripts lying around?" I sent it to her. She saying, this Stuart believed in this script and he couldn't get it made. Maybe we can do it. She connected she connected Joe Lynch to it. He had a great idea about refreshing the whole script, which helped me rewrite it in a way that still told the story, but told it in a new, fresh, and shiny way. And we think it worked.
Absolutely. And that was going to go into my second question about the gender swapping there for the story. Like that is just one of my favorite aspects of this, because I think it just it adds so much more to the film in the sense of just like a different dynamic and everything. I mean, me being a male myself, it's kind of like it's very interesting to see that the power dynamic you have when it comes to like an aspect of like sex and power and things like that. I love that the film plays with that. So I guess jumping from there, I do want to ask you, I know that sci-fi horror is kind of your forte, and like, I've listened to a few interviews, done some research on you, and that's been kind of the big thing in your career. And I want to know, what are your thoughts on just like sci-fi and horror as it's seen today? Do you think that we're getting a little bit closer back to the stuff that you and Stuart, kind of cultivated in the 80s there, where you guys kind of made these films that have now inspired generations to go on?
Yeah, it wasn't just us. Ran into Sam Raimi at the Texas Frightmare, and let's give him real credit. He was there
Oh,
earlier
absolutely.
than we were, and it's just another way to tell a story. It's just, the horror since our work starting in the 2000s, there's been, I'm a big fan of some of the more they're not as out there expressionistic as our work was. The Witch, for example, is a creepy little film, set in a distant period. It tells its story in an entirely different way from the way we told our stories, but it's a wonderful film. There are lots of ways to tell your stories. This is just the way we do ours. When we think there's plenty of room for it, and we think the audience is still happy to see that kind and enjoy that kind of film. So we're going to keep doing that. As far as the gender swapping goes, it's there in the original Lovecraft story. There aren't many women in Lovecraft stories, but there sure is a lot of fear of sex.
Yeah.
Who was it in my past? Who, what was it about my parents that makes me so creepy, so afraid of my own sanity? What, could I, what, that's deep inside of Lovecraft. So all we try to do is be faithful to the spirit that we find and drag that out and show it to you. Glad you enjoyed it. Glad you enjoyed. That was Joe's idea. The gender turn there, and it helped make the script new to me and more fun to tell. And by the way,
Absolutely.
spoiler alert, I'm a guy too. So I had to be really, had to be not careful about telling that story. You don't want to be careful, you want to be brave. But I had to run it by
Absolutely.
Barbara. I had to run it by Barbara Crampton. So she was involved as a collaborator on this film, not just as producer, but as a real thought leader in telling in how to tell this story. And we really listened closely to her.
Oh yeah, I mean you can see it through everything that she posts or says or any interviews she does with this film. It's like this is really a huge passion project for her. As like it seems like everything that she produces, she makes sure to, kind of put her heart into it. Alrighty. And the last question I have for you, I only have a minute left, is I know that you're also into Edgar Allan Poe is a huge inspiration to you as well. I know
Sure.
you've done the stage play of like Nevermore and then The Pit and the Pendulum, obviously, with you and Stuart Gordon there. Is that another avenue that you see yourself going down pretty soon again? Would you like to
I,
adapt more Poe?
I would love to. And if you get a chance, see our Masters of Horror episode, The Black Cat, which is where Jeffrey first he channels Poe. He doesn't act him, he channels him. It's a magnificent performance. I'd like to do several Poe adaptations. I think he's one of the great geniuses of American literature, one of the great unsung geniuses of American literature. I think those wonderful but crazy American International adaptations of Poe back in the 60s were fun, but they didn't do him enough credit to tell the stories in the troubled way he had to. He told them. I would love to work on more Poe. Thank you for projecting that for me, because I'm going to look closely now at what we can possibly do next. Yeah, that would be
I
great.
love that. I will be there to watch it. Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again, Dennis, for popping on the podcast here. We appreciate it immensely. Really, a lot of great nuggets in there, especially if you are interested in kind of diving into their process and how this whole film came to be about. I mean, it's just nice to really hear it from the horse's mouth, as they say, of just what exactly it took to get this film made. And I really cannot wait to hopefully get to speak with Dennis again at some point in the future. He is a gentleman and a scholar, and I absolutely need to pick his brain a little bit more on just what it took to get these films to the finish line. But yeah, that's going to bring us to our next interview. Now, this one is also one of those pinch yourself, holy shit, I'm talking to this person moments with, of course, the director, Joe Lynch. I got to say, this section of the interview would not have been possible without the help of Christian over at the Toronto After Dark Film Festival. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate all the work you did for us to make this happen. And I appreciate for Joe just cutting out a little bit of time for us so that way I could speak with him. But yeah, this a little bit longer than the last interview. Nonetheless, lots of great nuggets in here, lots of fun. So I'll just let the clip speak for itself. But yes, this is my interview with director Joe Lynch. It's great to meet you, Joe. Awesome to have you here.
Very
on the
nice to meet you.
podcast. Yeah.
No, thank you guys.
Yeah, this is definitely a dream come true for me, because I need to start off by saying that your filmmaking career has kind of impacted my life a little bit more than you were probably expecting coming in here. Because
Well, you're going to have to explain now.
I will, yes. So as a kid, my dad would rent basically anything and everything horror from Netflix. And one of his favorites was Wrong Turn. So when Wrong Turn 2 comes out, he's renting that. I have no clue what it is. I just stumble into the room right as the movie's kicking off. And I got to tell you, Kimberly's death, I was probably maybe 9 years old. I saw that, and it literally was just one of those things, because I'd always been into filmmaking. It was always something I wanted to do, and effects and all that stuff. I'm a Jaws kid. I love all of that. So when I saw her get split down the middle, that literally changed the way I look at special effects and filmmaking. I was just like, how the hell did they cut this woman in half? So yeah, I got to give you props for that. That's just been,
oh man.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this. Let's say that I paid it forward to all of the heroes of mine, like Tom Savini when he did Dawn of the Dead. That was one of my first horror movies of all time. And even when I was 3, I was like, how did they do that? How did that head explode? And when I would see movies like Gremlins or The Thing way too early, or American Werewolf in London, like your poster back there,
Yes, sir.
Same thing. I was immediately entranced by the magic trick behind the scenes, and how did they do that, and how were they able to make the guy from the Dr. Pepper commercials turn into a wolf, and how did they, make that guy's head like turn into a spider? Like all of these things were part of my movie upbringing, in that like it made me so curious about the craft. And if the same thing kind of was bestowed upon to you through Wrong Turn 2, then I'm just taking the baton and passing it to the next one. So that's great. That warms my dark heart.
There you go. Yeah, no, I seriously, I think it's a point of contention between my co-host and I, because he is admittedly not the biggest fan of any of the Wrong Turns other than the first, but I will always die on that hill with him of just like, no, dude, Wrong Turn 2 is definitely I would say my favorite in the franchise. So
well,
it was.
You're a much better person than your co-host. Sorry, co-host. I'm sorry. What are you gonna do?
No, he's got a good one. A question for you. He needed me to save special. I'll save that for a little later in here though. But I wanted to, I guess, start talking about Suitable Flesh here. I mean, this movie has been something that we both of us on this show have been covering, highlighting. We have been anticipating this. We're huge Lovecraft fans, huge fans of things like all of Stuart Gordon's work as far as Dagon, Reanimator, all that stuff, like all that. And the fact that you got to come in here and make this film, and not only make it but actually succeed at really making it feel like it fits in that universe. I gotta ask, like, was that an intimidating thing to come onto this project and just kind of step into the shoes of Stuart Gordon in a sense, and kind of have to, kind of almost carry on his legacy, like when you were handpicked by Barbara Crampton to do that?
Oh my God, dude. That was like one of the first, like when I usually always do like a pros and cons for any project and try to like come up with what are the legitimate reasons why I should, whether it's passion, whether it's a project, a gig, what have you. And then the cons, like, do they have the budget? Is it, the right kind of project that I should do, so on and so forth. And one of the cons, honestly, was, will I screw up Stuart's legacy? Because I knew that he was originally going to direct this. If this hadn't been something that Stuart was, kind of fused into with his career, and why it even got written, because, he was working on it with Dennis Paoli, I probably wouldn't have thought about it otherwise. But also, being such a huge Stuart Gordon fan myself, like even before this even came onto my radar, like Stuart was one of those directors that I would consider one of my heroes. So that, you're right, it was a huge responsibility. Like a lot of people in the last couple of days have talked about like the whole dynamic with Steven Spielberg's AI, and how he felt the same kind of responsibility to realize that story that Kubrick wanted to do, for so many years, for decades. And the sheer amount of pressure that he felt as well, and to varying degrees of success, if you'd say. And I'm sure, and I've read some reviews and people are like, no, Stuart Gordon would have done it better. Like, yeah, believe me, I would almost tend to agree, but that would have been Stuart's version. And I think, if I ever come to the point where I'm like, I have that long lost project that I would want to have realized, but I'm on my deathbed, like I would want someone that would have the same sensibilities as me. And in having a conversation with him, a couple times, it felt like we parked our cars in the same garage in that respect, when it came to tone and humor and sexuality and horror, and what got us, what turned us on, what turned us off. Like we felt like we were pretty much in sync. But yeah, it was a huge responsibility, but it was one where I also said, I can't let anyone else do this. Like I got very protective of it. But at the same time, thanks to Barbara, she also said, like, I know how protective you are on this project, but don't forget to make it your movie too. And that kind of vote of confidence was at least allowed me to know that where there were moments and scenes and details and nods that would be, my to Stuart up in the heavens, or wherever he may be, in whatever dimension, Cthulian dimension he may be, but also satisfy my own, cinematic kinks and what I really wanted to do with a project like this. So, I'm always curious to think, like, whoever else was on that list of people that could have done the movie, did they have the same kind of fetishistic love for Stuart's work that I did and what kind of movie that would have been. I know it wouldn't have been the Suitable Flesh. It probably wouldn't have had that title because I came up with the title.
Yeah.
But it would have been, just would have been an interesting like alternate reality dynamic. But as it is, like it was something that I held very dear to my heart, and I wanted to make sure that at the very least we got as many of the people that he worked with, back to the team, as many people that knew his work back in, or into the fray for the first time, and then do as faithful as something that we would have seen if Stuart had directed it, but at the same time something that I think we would have been proud to make our own.
That's great. And one of my favorite stories coming out of all of this with your talks and interviews through Fantastic Fest and everything since Tribeca has just been, and I will say I did talk to Dennis Paoli on Monday. So I got to kind of do a little bit of both sides here between writer director. And I think that one of the best things that just kind of really, when this story came out, and I heard this a while ago, when we were leading up to the film, was the fact that you, before signing on board, had said, I want to gender swap the roles, in the script. And, I think that is just one of the best elements when it comes to seeing this adaptation, because like I'm familiar with the source material, and so is my co-host. And we watched this and we heard about the gender swapping. It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let's see how this goes. And then, seeing it in the film, it's almost like I couldn't see it any other way now that it's in that, because it's like it is such a different, unique take. And so I gotta say, like, was that like something, I think you've answered this in other interviews, but like, was that something that you just felt was natural, was going to push this to that next level and not just make this an adaptation, but make this something that's truly your voice coming through?
Well, the idea of doing the gender swap thing was kind of an amalgamation between my writing partner and I, because when I got the script, and at the time she was in Europe during the pandemic and I was here, so we had an 8-hour difference. So I had 8 hours to absorb the script, and then I sent it to her and said, like, what do you think? And didn't really say much after that. But immediately when I read it, I had to put kind of two hats on. No, three. There was the one that's, my all of my loves for the genre and all the reasons why I would want to make the movie. Then there was the purview of the kind of the cultural language of the time, and like the temperature of the time. And it felt like that was something that if this movie had been made 15 years ago, sure, maybe a male skewed version of that story might have flown, might have gotten made, might have had some sexy silver foxes in the roles, and a young nubile actor or actress playing Asenath. But it just didn't feel like it was the right time to do something like that in the way that the world is right now, especially when you have certain audiences being particularly sensitive to that kind of misogyny and that kind of male gaze. I felt like this was an opportunity to not like try to steer away from it, but to lean into the idea, like what Asa even says, the future is female. I'm like, well, then I like, and that's how it is now, and it should be, and it should never have been otherwise. But why not make a movie that's for that audience that has never really been served before? And hopefully between the Lovecraft of it all and my meager lineage and Stuart's kind of oeuvre and his fan base, and just people who are looking for something a little different, I was hoping that like we would already have them, but let's try to service the older female demographic that could relate to these two strong women in this role, and give them something to hoot and holler about and get scared or relate to. So that was that second hat. The third hat was Stuart. It felt like knowing Stuart's work enough between Reanimator all the way up to his final film, and even his stage production. I got to see his final stage production of this show called Taste. That is incredibly provocative. It was about cannibalism, and it had a lot of sex like going on stage. There was a lot of stuff going on in that, and he was always known to press buttons without alienating. And I felt like, if I had that, like, what would Stuart do, which I kind of applied later on while I was making it, I went, what would Stuart do in this situation? He would probably try to buck the trend and try to do something that's a little different, a little more progressive, or if anything, a little more provocative. And when we did ultimately convince Dennis and Barbara, which didn't take a lot of convincing, because my partner and I kind of fashioned up this 8-page thesis of why we should do this for all the reasons why, and then said at the end, no harm, no foul. If you don't like it, it's it's no big deal. But this is what would make me want to make the movie. And they said, we like this idea. Let's run with it. When we opened up the script again and didn't just change the names, it created this whirlwind of creative ideas and themes that were never there in the script before, that were exciting to tackle. There were things, even before the casting, there were all these little details and thematic details and like themes of queerness and gender identity and gender fluidity, and even like I'm so thrilled that the trans community is really embracing this film and seeing but all of those things were discussed. They would have never been in there if it was the male side of things, because for all intents and purposes, we've seen this version of the story before. And I hate to say it, but in most cases, it kind of boils down to, a guy going, "Oh my God, I have boobies," and a girl going, "I can pee standing up."
Yeah.
Like we've delved into that territory before. This felt like it created something fresh and new with an old trope. We've seen body swapping movies before, but not quite like this. And that gender swap was more than just us looking progressive and checking off a few boxes. It truly was something that created something new and dangerous in the script. And then we kind of took it from there.
I love it. And I got to get on that because I think like one of the best elements of this movie is the fact that you guys use, sex as a tool for the antagonist. Like the way that I had described it to my co-host was like, Jason has a machete, Leatherface has a chainsaw, and then this entity has, sex and sexuality to really twist the human mind. And it's just such a smart take on it. And were you ever afraid that, a modern audience was never going to see past just, obviously the kind of mystique of it all when it comes to filming a sex scene in a movie, and they weren't going to see the nuances that you guys were placing on there? Did you ever have any fear during the making of this that people were just going to overlook that and they were going to more or less, just see the sex and stuff on screen?
Oh, don't worry. I've been reading all the reviews and some of them already have, but you can't service that crowd completely. You can't, like, I don't make movies for critics, even though, I'm still completely tethered to, like how people are responding to it, whether it's on Letterboxd, whether it's critically. I had a panic attack last night because I'm like, oh my God, we went down 2 points on Rotten Tomatoes. Oh shit. It's like, I care. And I'm not one of these filmmakers that goes, I never read the reviews. Of course I read the reviews. Like maybe for the good and the bad, but I do want to see what the reactions are from people. But at the same time, when we tackled this project, it's funny too, because my partner reminded me last night, my wife, who's been with me throughout this whole process. She did remind me what she said when we were first kind of talking about this project, which was, this isn't going to be for everybody. There are going to be people who do not like this movie. And, but Stuart probably never thought this way. And, and other filmmakers that we emulated that, were my heroes for this particular film, Brian De Palma, David Cronenberg, Paul Verhoeven, David Lynch, Claire Denis. These were filmmakers I don't think who think 4-quadrant, and they're the last people to go like, should I, do I have to really worry about the audience? In certain cases, probably everybody wants to, be embraced and have their films, be embraced by an audience. At the same time, if you're making for a movie for everybody, you end up making a movie for nobody, as a wise man once said. And with this, especially with the sex, and especially like when we were embarking on this project, when we started getting passes from actors, when they would say like too much sex, or there was a lot of challenging moments of like, do we even make this movie? Is the audience, like, is there going to be an audience for this? And I felt like there was enough of a package, especially with the fact that this was H.P. Lovecraft and is, you know, derived from Stuart Gordon, and it was, you know, in the horror realm. I felt like just having those would at least garner enough of an audience. Then the sexual side, I mean, look, we're in a kind of cultural pendulum in a way. You know, you can look back at some of the films that we've just discussed, or that, you know, influences film in the 80s and 90s, and the pendulum was swung the other way. And, you know, sexuality and eroticism, there wasn't a bat eyelash over those things as being problematic or triggering. They didn't even know what the word triggering was back then. Now, you know, I think one of the things that I was so glad that I had producers that embraced this and a studio that embraced this, actors who supported but also trusted me, was that we knew it wasn't going to be for everybody, but at the same time, there was going to be an audience that was thirsty for this kind of film. And if we treated the sex respectfully, and by that I mean there's no superfluous sex in this film whatsoever. It's all driving the plot, and it's driving character. There is always a consequence to the sex. You know, maybe not as grandiose as, like, say, Terminator, where it's like, well, you got to have a sex scene between Michael Biehn and what's her name? God, now
Linda
the
Hamilton.
name escapes me. Linda Hamilton.
Mm.
You got to have a sex scene between them because that's ultimately going to save the world.
Yeah.
You know, so like the stakes weren't that high, but one point we were even considering taking out the sex to attract a bigger name. And I was like, we can't do it. We just can't, because like you were saying, you know, the entity weaponizes not just sex, but other people's flesh. You know, like it represents, you know, an evil force that, you know, one that, not to give too much away, that you never really see. So the fact that this chameleon-esque entity has been exploiting people's bodies for years, you know, kind of like an executive in the 90s. I won't name names, Harvey Weinstein. But by doing that, I think that's a lot more terrifying, that it is utilizing body identity and body authority to, you know, to use for its own nefarious purposes. Now just combine that with the fact that it's really just horny and likes, you know, its kink is the fact that it likes to have orgasms through other people's bodies, is even scarier, because that's something that I think a lot, like many people can relate to in one form or another. So that's really where the buck stopped at anyone chafing at there being no sex in it, because it was integral to the plot. And for those who weren't part of it, you know, no harm, no foul. I'm just so blessed that we got the people that we did, because they saw the value of it. They saw the, you know, the need and the necessity and the importance of it. And then they trusted me to do it as respectfully as possible too.
Yeah, and you know, I think that the two lead actresses here, I mean, and also Judah, I mean, he did great. I loved him in Summer of '84. So to see him in such a more like adult role was just something that was kind of off-putting, and seeing his character kind of go from this, again, terrified, meek, like almost childlike young adult, to dealing with a situation that they have no comprehension of, to then, you know, having to flip it on. But I think one of the best things about this movie, and I'm going to probably keep saying that because I really love your film, but
please, no, stop, no.
But is just the ability that all of your actors here, especially these three, have to just you know, be able to switch their performance. You know, like when the entity, you know, getting into minor spoilers, I'll let people know there's spoilers in this, but when the entity possesses people, and how there's so much consistency among the cast there in their performances, to where I never once felt like, oh, well, this is somebody else's version of this entity. No, this is the character. And was that something that kind of formed naturally? Because I mean, you do have two very seasoned actresses who have these wonderful careers. So it's like, did they kind of form that naturally, or was that more something that you had to kind of help guide, and you were just kind of like, well, I want you guys to like make this movement, or you know, give this look? Is that something that you were constantly thinking about on set?
Of course, it was something that was very important to me from the jump. As an actor myself and someone who loves actors, you know, there are things that, you know, it's different with theater, but on film, you have the ability to hone in on certain details that, you know, or even just, performance ticks or little tells, if you will. And I knew that up until a certain point in the film, the very end, I wanted the audience to go along for the ride and know who was who, because technically I'm not telling the story. Elizabeth Derby is telling the story. So she's going to know, because she is one of the recipients of the entity's, malice. She's going to be the one that's going to know who's who in this situation. By the time we jump out of the flashback, now we're in a much more objective standpoint and an objective point of view. It doesn't make sense that the audience would know who it is at all times. So we wanted to make sure that that was a little more confusing for all the right reasons. Now, from when it comes to all those details, those were things that, like, there was one detail in the script, and that was the crooked hand. And I'm like, well, there's got to be more than that. Like it's got to be a performance thing. It's got to be even lines that weren't in the original script that we had developed in it to be like, if you heard, two actors say this one particular word, say dandy, right? And that's a word that no one uses anymore. But if an entity that's been, surviving over centuries might be taking like old timey dialogue and old timey words along with it, that would be one of those things that if you see Heather's character say that line, and then you hear Judah's character say that line, that to me, that's a tell. That's a little bit of a nod so that the audience goes, okay, just in case, if I wasn't, if I was confused at all, I know where the entity is now. But it wasn't just that; it was the crooked hand. We spent days coming up with the perfect crooked hand. I have so many pictures on my phone that have like weird hand shots. I'm sure if someone ever cracked my phone, they'd be like, what the fuck is this? I've expected like, yeah, I thought I was going to see dick pics, and I'm seeing hand pics. It was very weird. He's got a very particular fetish. And then there was actually something that I haven't talked a lot about, but is another tell that came organically, was one of the first days that we did one of the transferences, which was in the office. And no, I'm sorry, it's not. It was with Heather. It was a moment where she flipped her hair back, and Judah was on set for that. And he went, that's really good. I want to use that. So the next time that he transferred, he flipped his hair back. And then at one point we had another character flip their hair back. And then back at the end, there's a crucial moment that, truth be told, was not a shot that was supposed to be in the movie. It was when the Steadicam operator, I don't know if you know about Steadicams at all, but when you put Steadicams to rest, you flip it upside down, right? So we were shooting an 18-hour day. It was absolute madness. And just when we were getting ready to shoot a shot, he pushed record and then flipped it around. And it just so happened to be the moment that Heather does this hair flip, and it looks like she's already in character. That was before we shot the shot. So but Heather was so much in the mode, and she knew all the ticks and the tells, that little hair flip was a perfect tell. And that's how we were able to use that in the movie. But all the actors, when we got together, we all collectively started coming up with all of these things, so that when I'm on set, I can be like kind of the counselor and making sure that we got to make sure we see that and make sure that you say this a particular way, because we got to make sure that the audience knows in this situation who's who. But that was all created by the actors. I used this phrase before, but because we were all together kind of piling on details onto this thing that you never see, it's kind of like character shawarma, like those big things of lamb that just have all those pieces of meat. That the entity was created by my cast and by me, and that's how we were able to create the shawarma that we were able to slice off every time someone was body swapping, and go, okay, here's a little taste here, here's a little taste there, you might want to say it like this, and that would give that away. But again, it was just a perfect collaborative effort between me and the cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a layered performance, and it's such a layered concept that this entity brings, and I'm obsessed with this stuff. Like it's one of my favorite elements of just Lovecraftian horror, and just kind of things that people have been able to do with it, and just like really bring the unknowable to light, where it's like, yes, this creature has so much history to it, and we're just seeing a snippet, just a frame. And I love that. And I gotta ask, are you kind of eager to dive back into Lovecraft as maybe another future project? Do you have any stories or any short ideas that maybe you've kind of spawned from your experience here?
Yeah. Oh God, I would love. There's I've always loved the Call of Cthulhu, but that one's a little bit tough. Depends on the kind of
Yeah.
money you have. And obviously Del Toro has In the Mountains of Madness, which, like I'm not going to stop him from making that, sweeping epic.
I hope we see that one
To
day.
be, oh, me too, dude. I would like that. And if there's anybody who could do that story justice, it's him.
Yes.
Absolutely. I won't lie. I've been since actually well before I got involved in this project, because I do have an affinity for Lovecraft and cosmic horror and the possibilities that he allows, especially when you bring it into the modern world. The possibilities that you can take these stories and bring it into a modern age and a sensibility, kind of like what we did with this, and try new stories, like old stories, and try them in a new world. At the same time, when I first got to LA, I was pitching around the idea of doing a new version of Reanimator, because
Yeah.
I love the Reanimator series, but it had been a little dormant for a couple of years, and I know that I think there was another version that also came out that was like a new spin on the old tale.
Mhm.
But I love that mythos so much
Mhm.
that part of me, and it's just between you and me and everybody else who's listening out there. Part of me wanted to expand on this Miskatonic verse that we did in Suitable Flesh, and kind of reignite this world that Stuart had created, both in the original Reanimator and From Beyond, and even in Dagon and what is it, Castle Freak.
Yeah.
We wanted to keep that world open, because the world has a lot of stories. This particular world could also have a lot of stories. So that was something that I went, if we bring back Miskatonic, if it's the same Miskatonic, which it is from Reanimator, bring that back into the 4A 40 years later and show people it's still kicking. Who's to say that you couldn't have more Herbert West stories or more Reanimator stories? So back then, I didn't even think of any of that. I just wanted to kind of do a reboot. Now I kind of want to get the band back together and get another Reanimator going, like in one form or another, whether it's a feature film or TV rights. I'm saying this all now so that hopefully Brian Usna reads this and goes,
Yeah.
all right, Joe, all right. Because I've had many meetings with him and he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, look, Rotten Tomato scores are great. The critical response is awesome. Hopefully this makes a lot of money. Let us do our thing, because I feel like there's a lot more stories you can do in that whole Herbert West world.
Yeah.
Even if it was something where, not to do like a requel, but if the original Herbert West stories, it was like 6 chapters. It was almost like what Stephen King did with The Green Mile, where he had all these serialized chapters. And when you look at that series of stories and then compare it to what Stuart did with the film version of Reanimator, maybe less the Bride of Reanimator and Beyond Reanimator as much,
Yeah.
because those felt like derisions of that film, but not the stories.
Mhm.
He only crested the surface of that. Like the Herbert West story in Lovecraft spans like 10 years or
Mhm.
maybe more. Herbert West goes to war at one point, and that whole chapter is fucking fascinating. So if I was to do more Lovecraft, there's a couple stories that I would love to do, but if I really had my druthers and if I can convince the powers that be, I would love to take a crack at kind of bringing the Reanimator mythos back, because I think it's time. I really do think, between cloning and DNA mapping and stealth sim research, there's so many new technologies, medical technologies that have come to light, even 3D printing for limbs. There's so many avenues that I still feel are left to explore. And
Yeah.
what better person to do it than the Herbert West and the Miskatonic University gang?
I love it. You've literally cracked my brain now to where I have so many questions, but I know that we're got to wrap up here. So I got to ask Luke's final question here. So he's a big fan of Mayhem. He absolutely adores it.
Oh, nice.
It's a great film.
Okay. Anything I said before about Luke with Wrong Turn, all is forgiven, Luke. All is forgiven.
He needs to know, what was your favorite kill to shoot in Mayhem?
Ooh, wow. My favorite kill in Mayhem. To be honest, I think it would be the one with the Reaper. That was Austin, who plays the head of HR. That's the one where Samara Weaving sticks him with the saw. As much as I loved beating the shit out of the accounting department set to Faith No More, that was always a dream of mine.
Oh yeah.
There was something about I've always been fascinated. Like when you're a horror filmmaker, you're always thinking of like creative kills, and you're thinking of like devices that you could use to kill said person. I remember being in a Home Depot once and seeing that buzzsaw and going like, man, if you ran that up someone's stomach, blah, like it would just be everywhere. And originally in the script it was going to be one of those utility X-Acto knives, and then I saw Green Room and saw that those guys did it in Green Room, which was amazing. And I'm like, well, I can't do that now. But when I got to the ability to write that moment, I said, well, we got to use that compact buzzsaw. And not only that, but you have to do it where it runs up her, the Reaper's chest. Originally, it was going to be a lot gorier, but the unfortunate thing was that the makeup effects department forgot to do that effect. Oh. So I had to do it with all blood and all reactions. But when you have Austin, you have Dallas doing the Reaper with his reaction, but more importantly, when you see Samara Weaving having a blast doing that violent action, it was so, because it was just blood was going everywhere. And I come from the school of more blood. So I'm constantly on, like, off camera. If I don't have a bucket of blood next to me, which was my thing since Wrong Turn 2, I'm screaming more blood. And the special effects department is just pumping blood as it's geysering out and stuff. And that was the most fun, because just collectively, that whole scenario between all of the Serbian extras that are like making bets off to the side, they were really making bets. Like, I don't know, wow. I think actual money was exchanged. And then Steven was in the back, and he was enjoying it because he wasn't really involved. He was just stuck to the table because there was a scissor through his hand. But then watching Samara take absolute pleasure in killing this dude slowly with that saw, and watching the look on her face, because we shot the master first. And what you don't see is, you're not really seeing Samara Weaving. You're seeing more of the Reaper. But I was watching Sam and looking at her face, and her eyeballs are popping out of her skull because she couldn't stop laughing.
Yeah.
I think she was laughing because it was just so ridiculous that she just couldn't stop. But then I'm like, you're going to have to laugh during this. She's like, really? I thought I was going to be like, I'm like, nope, you are going to have a blast. I practically want you to have an orgasm in this scene because you're having such a good time. She's like, you got it, boss. And that whole moment there, that was purely her. And, like, watching that come together in the edit was just chef's kiss.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, dude. I'm so glad we got to make this work.
And yeah, guys, that is going to do it. That is going to conclude this video here. Thank you so much for stopping by and just hearing me gab to these two major inspirations to a lot of the work that, I write and that Luke writes. I mean, these guys are seriously two gentlemen that have really affected the way that I see not only Lovecraft in cinema, but horror cinema. And I think that they offer a lot as far as what could be coming in the future. Obviously, we've heard a little bit from Dennis about some interest in Edgar Allan Poe. We also have, Joe Lynch talking about hopefully one day being able to give his rendition of Reanimator, which as a Reanimator diehard, I got to say, I'd still love to see it. So yeah, guys, that's going to wrap it up for me here. Thank you so much for sitting down and watching this and sticking with me here. If you are a fan of the channel, or you're just stumbling across the channel and you have not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button for me. We are on our way up the ladder. Hopefully, in a few months here, we'll reach 2K and we'll keep things moving. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up on the channel. Yes, it's been a busy couple of months for us. We're kind of getting down to a little bit of a rest period, but don't worry, we still have a lot of really cool things planned, and a lot more stuff involving just interviews and more of our creative endeavors. So we hope you'll stick with us. Until next time, I am Dylan Newell, and remember, stay scared.